Good evening. My name is Kirsten Griebel, and on behalf of Simsbury Citizens First, I'd like to welcome all of you here this evening for the debate for the 16th District House of Representatives. We're very pleased and thankful to have the candidates here this evening in order to have them share their views on the issues that are facing Simsbury. Just before the start of the debate, we pulled names from a hat to determine the order in which the candidates would be seated and in which they would be answering the questions. Introducing the candidates, we have Mr. Robert Heahney, Republican nominee, Ms. Linda Scofield, Democrat nominee, Mr. Robert Kalechman, who is an independent petitioning candidate, and Ms. Deborah Noble, the Working Families Party candidate. I'd also like to introduce our moderator for this evening, Dr. Adrienne Fulco. Dr. Fulco is the director of the Public Policy and Law program at Trinity College and is Associate Professor of Legal and Policy Studies. She's been a faculty member at Trinity College since 1983. Dr. Fulco has presented her works at professional conferences in the United States and abroad and has frequently served as a political commentator for both local and national media. We're very pleased and honored to have Dr. Fulco moderating tonight's debate for us. The debate will begin with opening remarks by each candidate, which is limited to 5 minutes for each candidate, and followed by a set of questions with responses that will be limited to 2 minutes apiece, and then closing remarks, which are limited to 3 minutes. About halfway through the debate, we will break for a brief 5-minute break in order to allow our cameramen to change the film. If anybody is wearing any political support stickers or buttons, we ask that you remove them before the start of the debate. That was sent out to the candidates asking them to not do that for this evening. I'd like to thank Karen Hanville from SCTV for all her help in coordinating the production, organizing the equipment, scheduling, and setting up for the broadcast of tonight's debate, and the volunteers from SCTV for filming this evening. Tonight's debate will air on SCTV over the next 4 weeks on Channel 5. I'd also like to thank Rick Bazzano for his assistance in ensuring that this newly installed audio system in this room runs flawlessly this evening. And James Miller, the library administrator, for coordinating for our use in this room in the Simsbury Public Library. I ask now for everybody to please turn off all cell phones, and please, no applause, no cheering, and certainly no heckling this evening during the debate in order to allow each of the candidates their full allotment of time and enable them to speak without interruption. I will now turn the debate over to Dr. Fulco. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me? Yes. This is working, okay. It's a good mic because it's not coming back at me. Let me just say before we start, I'll just take a second. Some of you, any teachers in the room? So you know that it's Constitution Day is September 17th, and we celebrated that at Trinity today, and so this is a wonderful week to be holding a debate of this kind, so I think it's great. Okay, now I will read the question, and I will ask each candidate if the question needs repeating, I can do that, okay? And the first question will go to... excuse me, right. We're going to start with the opening statements, that's what I meant to say. And the order will be Mr. Heahney. I'm sorry, let me get the mic. Can you hear me if I'm over here? Because then I can look at my page. Okay. First, Mr. Heahney. Second, Ms. Scofield. Let's see if I can get this one right. Third, Mr. Kalechman. How was that? Good?
Very good, thank you.
Just need to get warmed up here. And fourth, Ms. Noble. So each candidate will have 5 minutes. We have a timer, and I know how to stop people from talking, so please stay within your limit. Okay, thank you, Mr. Heahney.
Thank you very much.
I want to thank Simsbury Citizens First for hosting these debates, and I want to thank the volunteers of SCTV for being here to tape it and making it available to all the citizens of Simsbury. And I also want to thank my fellow candidates for putting themselves forward and making themselves available to serve in the public, because it is a wonderful thing that people need to do, and this town has a great tradition of. I began my public service 20 years ago. I was first a member of the Planning Commission here in Simsbury as an alternate. Not exactly the highest rung of political service. It was a place of beginning. But I learned a lot there. I learned a lot because we were in the process of developing the plan of development in town. And that plan of development looks at how we want our town to develop over time. It is our future vision. And I worked through that in those 3 years and worked with those wonderful people on that commission, many of whom had different ideas of where the town should go. And we brought forth a great product that said, this is where Simsbury should go. We should preserve more farmland. We should protect our aquifers. We should make sure our open spaces are protected. And we should make sure that Simsbury maintains a vision of itself that is consistent with its traditions. That was a great base. And from my service on a planning commission, I went to the Board of Selectmen. And I was very lucky to be elected. And I would serve for 4 years on the Board of Selectmen. The Board of Selectmen is a very different kind of service than the Planning Commission. The Board of Selectmen is a place where you have to see that the services of government get done. You have to make sure that you have adequate police and fire and all the other services, to make sure the roads get plowed and to get reconditioned, and to make sure the budget is operated efficiently and that the budget stays low so that taxes can be reasonable for the people of our town. And through those 4 years, we were able to accomplish those things. And I took the knowledge of all those 4 years of building the budget and providing services to this town, and I was elected to the Board of Finance here in Simsbury. The Board of Finance is, again, a totally different kind of board. It's a board where you have to look at the big picture of our town, the big financial picture, and again, find out how we provide the services we want to the people at a reasonable price. And it was a huge challenge because there's ever demanding needs. As we went through that period of service, I remember my father telling me, who was retired here in town, that I'm retired. We need to keep those taxes low. And I had 4 children going through our school system, and I wanted to make sure they had a great education. And the Board of Finance is a place where those kinds of decisions get made, where you bring those tough balances of making sure senior citizens can afford to live in this town and also making sure that our children have a quality education. It's not just saying it, it's making it happen. And I'm very proud of the time I served, particularly when I was chairman of the Board of Finance, where we put in a debt policy that has served this town wonderfully for over 10 years, probably almost 15 years now, where we cap our capital expenditures at 7% and make sure all of the needs of our town get accomplished. That's the kind of forward thinking that makes government be effective, keeps taxes low, but provides the quality of services we needed. We hadn't improved a school building in 20 years, but when we put in the debt policy, we renovated Central School, we followed that up with Tooten Hills and Latimer Lane, and then we renovated all of Henry James and followed by the high school. That service, that knowledge, that experience, I took forward to my service in the state legislature. And everything we faced in terms of bills, I could bring the experience and knowledge forward and apply it and understand how it was going to affect our town from the integral knowledge of that basis of service. I'm the only candidate that brings that quality of service, that length of service, and that breadth of knowledge to the town of Simsbury as its candidate. And I thank you for considering me to be your state representative.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Scofield.
Thank you. I, too, would like to thank SCF for hosting us and SCTV for filming us. And I'd like to thank the voters for giving me the honor of serving my community as the state representative for the last 2 years. It's a rewarding job, and I'm proud of what I've achieved. I grew up in an era when the president said, "Ask not what your country what can do for you, ask what you can do for your country." So I've always had a strong sense of duty about public service. This concept that rights come with responsibilities was deeply impressed upon me by my entire community and my family. I grew up in a town much like Simsbury, where people fought for equal rights and against injustices, but also expected to shoulder responsibilities to family, community, and country. My values include a belief that people have the right to a good education for their children, the right to earn the dignity of a good job, the right to be treated with equality and respect, the right to prosper. My belief in responsibility led me to work hard, be honest, help others, and step up to civic duty, either through volunteerism or through public service. I've lived my values by working as a nurse to help disadvantaged people, including migrant farm workers and the Navajos in Arizona. I ran the Medicaid program in Connecticut to provide health care to the poor. I also spent some of my career in business, where I gained an appreciation for the challenge of keeping a business in the black, so that employees could have good jobs and the state could collect its taxes. In both for-profit and nonprofit companies, I ran health plans. And I also ran my own small business, which was a consulting firm to state and federal health programs, to insurers, to physician associations, to consumer rights groups. As a result of my career in both public service and private enterprise, I understand that delicate balance between government and the private sector. Each needs the other to enable them to succeed, and we, the citizens and the consumers, need them both to assure our economic prosperity, our access to goods and services, and our public safety. My background shaped my beliefs. I believe we should provide for the needs of those who are disadvantaged in our society and unable to care for themselves. I believe we have a responsibility to work hard, earn our rights, and give back to our communities. I understand that we're in competition as a state with other states for employers and workers, and we've been losing some of both of those. So we need to provide a business climate that helps to grow the economy in Connecticut so that workers have a choice of good jobs and young people don't need to leave the state in order to find a career. I believe we can accomplish a lot more through incentives than mandates. And I believe that we should expect our government to develop policies and spend our money wisely and in a manner that balances the objectives of good service and least cost. In the last 2 years of both campaigning and being your state representative, I've listened to a lot of constituents. I've personally knocked on almost 8,000 doors in this town, and I've received correspondence from over 700 people, many of whom write frequently. Some of them are in the audience. I can tell you that a majority of people, like me, believe that there's a middle ground on most issues, where nonpartisanship, compromise, common sense, and pragmatism rule, where getting things done is more important than standing on rigid ideology, and where results and progress count, not rhetoric. In this election, I have candidates running on both my right and my left, and they're conveniently located in the right places, which I believe demonstrates that I'm kind of the happy medium. Most importantly, I've produced real results, getting legislation passed to expand affordable benefit options for families and small businesses, increasing education funding and open space funding for Simsbury, expanding long-term care options for seniors, and advancing the protection of our river. And I've done all of these things without voting for any tax increases. I'm new to politics, and I see my role as a policymaker and problem solver. I want to serve you in order that I can make a real contribution. In the past 2 years, I feel I've made a real contribution, and I've derived great satisfaction from both getting legislation passed and helping people with problems. I do believe I have a significant contribution yet to make in the next 2 years as we face a difficult economy and need an effective voice to develop reasonable approaches to promote prosperity and well-being for everyone in the state. I will continue to promote job growth, find ways to increase access to affordable health care, protect our environment, and obtain appropriate funding for Simsbury schools. I ask that you return me to office with your vote on November 4th.
Under the wire. Thank you. Mr. Kalechman.
It's only appropriate, being that today is President's Day and Constitution Day, that we mention John Mason. John Mason introduced the first 10 amendments to the Constitution, one of which gives us the very right to be here tonight. It's called free speech. I'd like to thank the Simsbury Citizen First Party for arranging the debate for state representative of the 16th Assembly District, town of Simsbury. You will be addressed by my three opponents, who will try to explain why they should be elected as your state representative. I will explain in detail why the citizens of Simsbury should vote for me on Election Day on Tuesday, November 4th, 2008. The town of Simsbury and its citizens can no longer afford what my opponents, both Democrat and Republican, have to offer, is the same old party line which serves the special interest and self-serving political appointees who are out for their own personal gain. Most of you are familiar with their methods. They are the letter writers who give the glowing reports expounding their praise upon their candidates. These are the people who have curried political favor and received remuneration for their support, which is totally wrong. In these trying times, with people losing jobs, losing homes, there is no room to favor one person over another due to his party affiliation or monetary political support. I like to point out the cronyism and nepotism in a recent letter which was published in both the Simsbury Post and the Simsbury Life, a week or so apart. The author of the letter, a Democratic member of the Simsbury Economic Development Commission, whose chairman just happens to be Mark Deming, the husband of Linda Scofield, who is an attempt on behalf of Alan Needham to further his political ambitions by the use of this self-serving letter. It should be noted that Mrs. Scofield, in her Form 30, which was filed with the State Election Enforcement Commission, that she received $25,000 in taxpayers' money paid to her as public funds. Why is this appropriate for Ms. Scofield, but inappropriate for Deborah Noble, who is running for state representative on the Working Families Party of Simsbury, to receive public funding? This is just another example of the abuses of Ms. Scofield and her party misrepresenting the facts. It has also been my opinion that the taxpayers should not be asked to finance a candidate's candidacy, but in the spirit of the Connecticut Constitution and the Connecticut state statutes, Mrs. Noble, as a candidate, and for that matter, any citizen of Simsbury, has every right to public financing. In closing, nepotism should not be practiced in Simsbury, or for that matter, in the Connecticut House of Representatives. I thank you.
Thank you. And finally, Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I'd like to thank my other three esteemed colleagues sitting up here with me. They've done an excellent job of representing themselves tonight. Thank you very much. And thank you to all of you for showing up tonight. I think it's wonderful to see so many faces in Simsbury and to see so many people involved in the process. Too often we hear about voter apathy and how people are jaded and not involved, but obviously that's not the case here in Simsbury, where you have 4 candidates running for 1 office. I'd like to take just a minute to introduce myself to you. I understand that many of you don't know me, so if you'll give me just a brief second to do that. My family moved here when I was 5 years old. I'm a longtime Simsbury resident. That was 40 years ago. I went to Terriffill School, Henry James, when it was Henry James Memorial, not middle school, and to Simsbury High School. I have 3 children. My eldest is named Leah, she's 25. Middle one is Brian, who's 21. And my son Sam is a sophomore at Simsbury High School. I lived here for many, many years, only leaving in the late 1990s when I could no longer afford to live here, unfortunately. And that has happened to many of my high school classmates, that we were priced out of our hometown. That's a trend that I'd like to see changed. In my travels, I ran for state senate in the 29th district, and I was also elected to the Board of Selectmen in Willimantic in 2003, where I served 2 years. In my professional career, I've had the privilege of being very politically active, working on women's issues, healthcare, tax structure. I've spoken at congressional briefings in Washington, D.C., sat down with your senators and representatives on more occasions than I care to remember. I am not new to politics, though I may be new to you. When I decided to run for office this time around, it was because I felt a sense of duty. I felt that the issues and concerns that I'd been hearing about from so many, healthcare, paid sick days, and unfair tax structure, the outsourcing of Connecticut jobs and jobs in general, were not being addressed. And I was asked to step up and do my duty, and I did. And that's why I'm running for office. I know that the rising cost of healthcare is a concern for employers and employees. I myself, though I'm fully employed, 40 hours a week, do not have access to healthcare through my employer, nor do I have paid sick days. These are two issues which I seek to rectify at the General Assembly, whether as an elected official or not. I'm going to keep this brief. I know we have a lot of issues to get to. I'd like to thank you for your time. And since beginning my campaign, I've received several endorsements from the Connecticut Council of Police, National Association of Social Workers, the American Federation of Teachers, the State Employees Union, and NARAL. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for staying within the limit. Okay, we will begin with our first question now, and we will be going actually in this order for the first question. And it is a question on property tax reform. And again, if anyone needs it repeated, please just ask me, but I'll read it now. Over 2/3 of all municipal revenues in Connecticut are derived from the property tax. With such a great reliance on property tax to fund essential municipal services, such as education, towns all too often make land use decisions based on the desire to grow their grand list, resulting in only marginal and short-term relief to the taxpayers while inadvertently contributing to sprawl. How would you reform the current system in order to reduce the town's reliance on the property tax for all taxpayers, residents, and businesses alike? And I will turn first to Mr. Heahney to answer that question.
Thank you. I think we could all agree that property taxes are too high here in Simsbury. And yet, if we look at it, the government and the services provided by Simsbury are provided at a very, very efficient rate. If you compare our cost per pupil of education, we are going to be in the lower third of all towns in Connecticut. And education makes up about 70 to 75% of our town budget. Similarly, if you compare the providing of core services like the police department, highway department, et cetera, you're going to find that Simsbury provides those less expensively than almost every other town, than most towns in this state. So we're not facing overtaxation as a result of overspending. We have had very good government here in town, and they've worked in a bipartisan spirit to make that happen. So what's the factor that makes the difference? Well, Simsbury has about 10% of its property base in commercial property, while Avon and Farmington have more than 20. That makes our taxes 10% higher than theirs, and that's what drives these kinds of issues. We need to have better state funding for our education, which is the biggest part of our budget. And that's the first thing that will hold down taxes in town. And it needs to take into consideration towns that do not have large property tax bases. The formula for division of education aid has no character, no determination of whether how much your commercial property is. It's a very unfair factor, And if that were changed, it would make a remarkable difference and take the pressure off a town like Simsbury to bring in development that we don't want and that's not in the character of our community.
Thank you. Okay, second, do you need the question repeated?
No, thank you.
You're good, okay. Ms. Scofield?
I talked to a lot of constituents, as I said earlier, and certainly their number one complaint is property taxes. Connecticut has the second highest property taxes in the nation, and Simsbury is 17th within Connecticut. As Rob said, it's driven largely by education costs, which compose most of the budget. I think there are 5 things we ought to be focused on. First, we need to make sure that Simsbury gets its fair share of education funding. That funding had languished for a pretty long time. In 1999, we got $417 per pupil. In 2006, it was still only $471. In the last few years, it's finally come up quite a bit. We have $1,084 per pupil now, but we need to continue to fight for a better formula and a fair share for Simsbury. Secondly, we need to look to our local officials to manage the spending and assure that it is efficient. I think there is still room for regionalization to help make spending more efficient for some items. Third, we can look at what other states do in terms of allowing the local authorities to come up with alternative ways of raising funds, whether those are fees or other local taxes aside from just property tax. We need to explore business development that expands the tax base but still works within smart growth principles. And fifth, I'd like to see us have some downtown development, especially for housing, high-density housing that would stimulate downtown business growth while at the same time making for a walkable community and an expanded tax base.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kalechman, are you set with the question?
Thank you. We just heard from two of the, one is an incumbent of the Democratic Party, and we just heard from the Republican candidate who's held the office of state representative for 8 years. And they all have ideas. Why weren't these ideas put in the last 2 years or 8 years ago? Now, let me get to a fact. In the last special session, the Democratic majority under James Amon introduced an act concerning real estate conveyance tax. This act was not brought up during the regular session. A special session was called by Mr. Amon and Mr. Donovan to address this question. My opponent, Linda Scofield, voted for taxes.
No, I didn't.
She voted for an act concerning the real estate conveyance tax. She voted to put that tax into being. She taxed you, and she's sitting here telling you she's not going to tax you. She taxed you. She's come up with spending, tax and spend programs. One frivolous program is a $5,000 gazebo for Simsbury. Now, you tell me what benefit that gazebo is doing for education, what benefit that's doing for anything but cronyism. It's a cronyism, it's pork is what it is. And I can go through, time is running out, but if you want to address me after the meeting, I can go through item after item after item.
Thank you. Ms. Noble?
Thank you. There's no denying that Connecticut's property tax is killing state residents. It's killing state residents here in Simsbury and across the state. Our taxes are too high. Our property taxes are too high. But when I hear them talk about a property tax cap in Hartford, I get a little nervous because I don't think that's a wise approach either. I think what we need to do is stop depending so much on the property taxes in our cities and towns to fund education, to fund municipal costs. We need to find other revenue streams, and I have a few ideas of how to do that. Having been a select woman in one of the poorest towns in Connecticut, we were always scrambling for money and scrambling for ideas. And what we always asked our representatives and senators to do was to fully fund the pilot program. That's the payment in lieu of taxes. I think Simsbury should be doing the same thing. I think that the legislature should fund this program. It was a good idea when it's developed, and it needs to be funded. We should also be fully funding the education cost sharing grant for all the towns. Thank you. We should increase the state reimbursement for special education costs. Again, education is the biggest part of the budget, and we rely too heavily on our property taxes to fund it. We need to establish a comprehensive smart growth and responsible initiative that recognizes the destructive link between our land use policies and property taxes. There have been some amazing developments out in the Midwest whereby they tax big box stores at a different rate than other businesses. And out in Pittsburgh, they tax open land differently than they tax businesses. There's a lot of movement out there. There's a lot of good ideas on how to recreate the property tax structure, and I don't think we're taking enough advantage of that.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, second question, and we will begin with Ms. Scofield on this question. And this question is on health care. Of major concern to businesses, individuals, and providers in Connecticut is the costs of and accessibility to quality health care. Do you share those concerns? And what are your plans to increase accessibility and control and reduce costs? In 2 minutes.
And I'll take 2 seconds to say that Mr. Kalechman is completely factually wrong. I voted against the conveyance tax, against my own party, just so. Okay, affordable health benefits have been an issue for decades, and more than one president has tried to resolve this at the national level and has failed. So I believe we really do need to keep working at this issue in the states and not wait for a federal solution. But I also recognize that anything we do in one small state like Connecticut has to be affordable within the state's budget, and it has to make sure we don't disadvantage Connecticut relative to other states when it comes to attracting businesses and workers. I've worked hard on healthcare issues in the last 2 years. Given my education and my 30-year career in healthcare, I feel I had a lot to contribute there. I did get some legislation passed that did help with the situation. We have a long way to go yet. But one of the bills I'm most proud of is that we changed the law so that kids graduating from college can stay on their parents' health benefits plan until their 26th birthday. This helps a lot of uninsured young adults to have immediate access to health benefits. Really didn't cost the state anything. I supported the enhanced MEHIP program, it's called, that's offered by the comptroller for small businesses to be part of a larger pooling opportunity where they can spread their risks, where there are lower administrative costs so the premiums are more affordable. I proposed and will propose again a comprehensive health reform bill that included tax incentives for employers to offer coverage to low-wage workers, premium subsidies for low and middle-income workers, and statewide coordination of quality improvement initiatives that can help address the problem of costs in health care. I wrote legislation to increase health benefits for seniors on CONPACE. It would save seniors about $1,100 a year, and I don't get to describe it to you because I'm cut off, but we have a long way to go, and we need to keep working on it.
Okay, thank you very much. Next, Mr. Kalechman.
I don't want to belabor a point, but on this conveyance tax, the conveyance tax was introduced by the Democratic majority, Mr. Amon. At the time, the Republican minority tried to introduce amendments to this bill. Representative Donovan, who's the whip, passed a motion to cut off debate, right? Now, this is the House of Representatives, temple of the people, where debate is accepted and encouraged. Representative Linda Scofield voted to cut off debate. Can you imagine that? We send them there, we pay them there to debate, and she voted to cut off debate. And it was more than once, and I was sitting there and I watched the board, and she voted to cut off debate. And she also voted for a conveyance tax.
We didn't.
And she can say what she wants and come up with all this thing. She voted for the conveyance tax, and she voted to shut off debate, and she voted against every amendment that was proposed to make less tax on you, the people of Simsbury. Now, this is what we run into. They run, and good thing we have a debate, because 2 years ago, we had no debate. They get up, they talked, they said what they were going to do. Nobody knew anything what they were going to do. Then they came back, and they had one thing in mind, their own party special interest. And I conclude with that.
Okay,
And
I think what we would like to do is if everybody would stay on point and answer the specific question, you can save for your closing remarks anything else that you would like to say, and you may want to take notes on that. But I think the people are here to try to hear answers to these particular questions. So I would just ask everybody observe those rules. Thank you. Okay, Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I think that healthcare is on everyone's mind, and the high cost of healthcare is on everyone's mind. I'd like to start out just by saying that it's my firm belief, and it's been my belief for many years, that healthcare is a right, not a privilege. And while I appreciate all the hard work that they did at the legislature, opening up more healthcare opportunities, unfortunately, they keep tying people's healthcare insurance to their employment, and that needs to stop. Healthcare should not be tied to employment. They're two separate issues. In a country such as this, the wealthiest country in the world, everyone has the right to quality, affordable health care, and they should have access to it. There were several measures, one of them which, while passed by the legislature, was vetoed by the governor, and that was the municipal health care pooling bill that would have allowed towns, small businesses, nonprofits to pie into the state health care plan, thereby cutting not only business costs, municipal costs, and helping to alleviate some of the healthcare issues that we have in the state. 47 million people in this country do not have access to healthcare insurance, and because of that, they have very limited, if any, access at all to quality healthcare. We need to do more with preventative care. Let's help people before they get ill. And finally, paid sick days. And that ties right in with healthcare, because if you have an employee who is sick, you don't want them coming to work. And yet if they don't have paid sick days, they cannot stay home and get well. A sick employee means a sick workplace. Sick workplace is not good for the state of Connecticut. The bottom line is that no one should ever go without health care. Access to it, whether they have insurance or not, it should be there for them.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. We're lucky to live in a state that has more people insured than virtually any other state in this country. But having anyone uninsured and anyone without health care is not acceptable. We're a state that needs to step up and figure out the ways to bring affordable, available health care to every citizen. But how do we go about doing that? We don't do it by taking away the quality health care that 96% of the families of this town have. We take a different approach. We must find a way to fill in the gaps, to say, let's take 10% and reduce it. Let's find a way to bring health care that's affordable to each and every family. We began that process while I was in the state legislature when we began the Husky program. And we continued it when we expanded the Husky program. And that program has brought affordable health care to working families that are in the lower income sphere throughout our state. It's been a phenomenal success. It shows us that we can meet the problems, but we still have people that need health care that has to be affordable and acceptable. And how do we deal with that? And I think Governor Well has led us reasonably well in this way. She has said, we're going to find programs that starts to identify ways to bring affordable health care to that group of people who do not have it. There are a lot of other things that we can do with our tax laws to make the health care we're paying for more affordable. And we need to take those steps. I fought for years to bring HSAs, which were fought mightily by the majority, until finally they agreed that that was a reasonable thing to make affordable health care to many small businesses. There are a lot of programs that we can put forth, but the goal must be not to bring universal health care, one state Canadian plan, but to bring accessible, affordable health care to each and every family in this state.
Thank you. Okay, we're already on to our third question, and I'll just remind you that after this question, we'll have a little bit of a break so the guys can change the film and people can stretch their legs. And I do want to thank everybody for staying within the limits. This is fabulous. This is just excellent. Okay, it must be the guy with the timer, right? Okay, the third question, an important question not only in Connecticut but everywhere, as all of these questions are, is on ethics. And it's a little bit of a longer question, so again, if anyone needs it repeated, let me know. Budget difficulties, a short legislative session, and a number of political skirmishes frustrated efforts to pass a bipartisan measure to strengthen the state's ethics laws. The proposed legislation would have permitted judges to revoke pensions of public officials and state employees convicted of corruption, required adoption of municipal codes of ethics, banned the solicitation of campaign contributions by executive and legislative chiefs of staff, and made it a crime for public officials and employees to fail to report a bribe. The ethics bill ultimately died without concurrent action in the House and Senate. Do you believe there is a need to strengthen the state's ethics laws? And if so, which initiatives would you support? And Mr. Kalechman, you're going to take the lead this time.
Thank you. I'd like to give you a little history. In the last session of the Senate and the House of Representatives, the Assembly, there was an act that was introduced by Senator Williams, and it was called an act creating the Office of State Ethics and Citizens Ethics Advisory Board. And it was proposed bill number 1, and it was introduced by Senator Williams of the 29th District. And it was voted on, and it was passed by a slim majority, but it was voted on. And it was sent down to the House. And here again, the 16th District's state representative had to vote on it, right? Where was she? The House rejected this. They didn't want any part of it. They disagreed with their own party. They disagreed with the Senate majority leader, Senator Williams, who sent the bill down. And they couldn't agree. So what they did was they let the clock run out, and at midnight, there was no ethics bill, and we were left without an ethics bill. They then called a special session, and they introduced bill number 6502. And this was introduced by Senator Amon, the majority party, and Senator Williams, the majority party. It was introduced. And the agreement was made in the back room. Here it is, the House, the Temple of the People. The agreement was made in the back room. And it was brought out before.
Okay, time up.
And we now have it was voted on, and we now have a ethics bill that includes municipal workers and elected municipal officials.
Thank you. Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I, for one, was very, very shocked at the last session when not a single ethics bill was passed. With the recent rash of convictions and arrests of our public officials in Connecticut, the state of Connecticut has suffered an embarrassment and a tarnish, if you will, that we cannot tolerate anymore. And I, for the life of me, cannot understand why the two parties could not come to an agreement and pass a bill that obviously contains so much common sense. If you accept a bribe, you will be convicted and arrested. Arrested and convicted, pardon me. Get those confused sometimes. If you fail to report a bribe, the same thing should happen. If you break the law as a public elected official, you will pay a price. It is simply black and white common sense. If we break the law, do we not pay a price for it? Why should our public officials be held to different standards? We need to pass a municipal code of ethics. There are organizations out there who've already written the blueprint for these. Bills have been written. It is absolutely unconscionable and unreasonable that these ethics bills could not be passed last session. I support them wholeheartedly. But the one part of it I don't support is to equate a state employee and hold them to the same standard that you hold a public elected official. I don't believe you should deny their pension. I believe it's comparing apples and oranges when you compare someone's record who drives a bus to the governor of the state of Connecticut. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. I thought I was going to say that I agree with Ms. Noble, but then she brought up that last line.
I'm sorry.
I think it's been a great embarrassment to every one of the citizens of this state that we have seen our public officials violate the trust that we place in them and commit abuse of their office. And unfortunately, this has also occurred, not in just elected and appointed public officials, but it's occurred in state employees. Which one of us can forget, in light of the disasters that happened on 9/11, that our DMV officials were selling identification, driver license identifications, to anyone who had the money, and that would give you your pass. As we all know, you want to get on a plane? Show me your driver's license. I think that might have been the biggest crime in the face of what we had been through, of all of these violations by public officials. I've always been a strong supporter of strong ethics laws. In this last session, the debate came down to the fact of differentiating, as Ms. Noble just said, between public employees and elected public officials. We put trust in both of them. We compensate them to do the people's work. Ethics should apply to both of them equally, and the law should have passed during regular session. It should not have been a game of the majority to try to protect union employees from what is reasonable ethics, that they don't abuse their office to their personal gain, and if they do, that their pensions can be removed from them to make up for the abuse that they have done to the public. If I'm elected, I will support strong ethics laws that apply to elected officials, appointed officials, and public employees.
Thank you. And finally, before our break, Ms. Scofield.
In the wake of scandals that others have mentioned at every level of government, the public has lost trust for government officials in general. And it's really unfortunate because, quite honestly, I can tell you from my own experience that the vast majority of public employees and elected officials are good people who want to serve honorably and make a good contribution. And certainly we've seen scandals in the private sector as well. Think about Enron, WorldCom. It's not unique to the public sector. But I do believe that the public sector should be held to a higher standard than even the private sector because we're dealing with the people's money and the people's trust. I have to correct the question. We did, in fact, pass a major ethics reform bill in special session that included all of the provisions that were named in the question. The new ethics reform law does three key things. It enables judges to revoke or reduce pensions of state or municipal employees who commit crimes in the course of their job. It makes it illegal to fail to report an attempted bribe, which you might recall was a situation Lou DeLuca found himself in. It strengthens revolving door prohibitions so that an employee cannot award a contract to someone and turn around and get a nice high-paying job 2 months later once the contractor starts working. We also passed a clean contracting bill a year ago in the 2007 session that prevents the awarding of contracts to cronies, which was an issue that came up under the Rowland administration. And how it did that was it created a new set of standards that are developed by an independent board to assure transparency and accountability. So at this point, we have a robust body of ethics laws, and we need to make sure that they are vigorously enforced. Our integrity as lawmakers is essential to being able to get anything done, and I'm committed to maintaining a reputation that I can be proud of.
Perfect. On that note, a 5-minute break, and I will be starting in 5 minutes. We're going to set the timer for 5 minutes. So everybody, do your thing. Okay, just to remind you, we have one more prepared question, and then we have 2 questions that were submitted by residents of Simsbury, so those should be interesting as well. Okay, first question of the second half is on regional cooperation. With increased healthcare and energy costs, our towns must be more creative in finding solutions to meet budgetary shortfalls. Regional purchasing and service sharing is one such solution. Simsbury's own first select woman has proposed strong support for regional cooperation, but it will take endorsement by the legislature to facilitate this process statewide. Would you be willing to support regionalism in Connecticut? What services or programs, including education, would you support incorporating into a regional approach to governing? And we will begin our 4th question. Responses first from Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I do support regionalism in the state of Connecticut, and I will...
Excuse me 1 second.
Yes.
I was asked that everybody pull your mics up because some people in the back are having a little difficulty hearing you. If you could do that before we start, I'm sorry.
That's fine.
Thank you.
As I said previously, I do support regionalism in Connecticut. I'm not sure if anybody in the audience or watching is aware of this, but Connecticut is the only state in the country that does not have a county form of government. We abolished it back in 1959. The reasons for doing so were very complex, but it was decided at that point that there was too much big government and we needed to eliminate that. So we got rid of our regional government, we got rid of county government, and what we created was 169 kingdoms in the state of Connecticut, where each kingdom, fiefdom if you will, acts independently. And anybody who goes to Costco and who buys in bulk understands that buying in bulk is much better than buying individually, which is, in a sense, the biggest support for regionalism. We'll be able to work with towns surrounding us and thereby, oh, I'm getting the high sign, be able to create larger municipal purchasing pools. And let's face it, our lives don't end at the borders of Simsbury, and economic development doesn't end at the borders of Simsbury, and we have to work with the towns surrounding us in order to have more cooperation with regards to smart growth and regionalization and working together to lower costs for everyone involved.
Thank you. Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. During my time on the Board of Selectmen and my time on the Board of Finance, I was a big advocate of regional cooperation. In fact, Simsbury was the 9th most active town in regional cooperation throughout the state of Connecticut, out of 169 towns. At that time, when I left the Board of Finance, we had 86 different programs of regional cooperation that we, the town of Simsbury, participated in. 23 of those were education programs that we participated in. And the remainder, the 63, were town programs. We did everything from buying cooperatively all the oil for our town, both on the town side and the Board of Ed, to cooperatively buying books and you name it. If there was a program that would save us money, and we could get into it voluntarily and participate while it saved us money, we were in. We believed in it, and we made it happen. I think a lot of people don't realize that we have been that involved that far back. 86 different programs. But the key that I found as I reviewed those programs and watched how productive they were in saving us money was to understand that it had to be a voluntary participation, something that you go into because it's a benefit for you and those you join. And the day that it's not a benefit to the town of Simsbury or to the other towns, that you have the freedom to step away and to go into a direction that would save you more money. I think Simsbury has been a leader in this area. And I think that the thing that can make a difference is for the state of Connecticut to give incentives for towns to cooperate. Because what we did was because it was good for us and the people we partnered with. But Connecticut can make it better by encouraging participation. And that's what I would do as Simsbury State Representative. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Scofield.
I, too, certainly support regionalization. It really is a key to efficiency and cost control. As Ms. Noble said, most other states do use counties or some other regional authority, and the duplication across 169 towns is terribly inefficient. But our Connecticut culture really favors local control, and local control does have some value. There is value to having the taxation authority and the spending authority be one and the same because it creates a little more accountability. I think you can get the best of both worlds, that accountability and the efficiency, by doing actually what Rob said, allowing for voluntary participation in purchasing cooperatives and the like. And there are many opportunities. CREC, the Capital Region Education Council, offers lots of opportunities, and Simsbury does take advantage of them, doing teacher training, purchasing of books, as he mentioned, technology support, et cetera. CROG also provides lots of opportunities, and Simsbury takes advantage of that for purchasing everything from road salt to disaster planning. We did, in fact, in the legislature, do just what Rob mentioned. We created incentives. We gave grants of $8.6 million to towns and organizations like CROG. Simsbury, as part of CROG, has gotten $5.2 million to do planning, and the result is that we'll be saving almost $800,000 a year once these projects are all completed. They could include things from a regional animal control facility to development of IT projects. We do need to encourage more of this. I think the state should continue to provide these kind of planning grants and also evaluate how effective it's been in the towns, because once towns see how much they're saving, other towns will be more comfortable moving in that direction. There's certainly many more areas where we can do this kind of planning.
Thank you. And finally on this question, Mr. Kalechman.
As much as things change, they stay the same. Give you a little history. Back when Abe Ribicoff was governor, there was a controversy going on is the governor wanted control of the judicial system. Up to that point, the counties appointed their own judges, and it was a big piece of pork to have that control to appoint a judge. So they worked it around and they did away with county government. We had a great county government in Harford County, and at that time Simsbury was part of Harford County, and we had a great county government. They provided taxes, they provided schools, they provided roads, they provided courts, it provided everything. And what it maintained was we kept our local control. In other words, the county kept control of these projects rather than give it away. Now, I'm surprised that my elected officials or pre-elected officials or ex-elected officials do not know that we have CROG, do not know that we have the police department that works in conjunction with the other areas' police departments. We have county system now, and it just has to be more or less like a diamond. You have to polish it. And I think if they polish it, it'll be able to accommodate the seniors, be able to accommodate our children, and it will be a feather in our cap to go to the regional system, which we had once before, but in their infinite wisdom, they decided to do against it. And this was done by a Democratic administration. Here again, they didn't know what they were doing.
Thank you. Okay, we will turn to the questions submitted by residents of the town. These questions were taken, rather the questions that will be asked tonight were taken from questions submitted to Simsbury Citizens First website by residents and are unanticipated by the candidates. Each candidate will have 2 minutes to respond, and we will begin with the first question with Mr. Heahney, and here is the question. In 2 minutes, what do you think is the most important issue facing Simsbury?
As I said before, I think the most important issue facing Simsbury is the high burden of taxes we're paying to live in this community. But that ties in with other issues. If we had fair education funding, we wouldn't have the problem that we have with high taxes. And so these issues all come together. They also push us to try to offset those taxes by building commercial developments that we don't want as a community, that are not in our character. And so while the most important issue is the taxes, it is interrelated with the way we act with our state and the fact that the funding formula is unfair to towns like Simsbury, and that we have a system by which we cannot come up with other systems for taxes. If just a very small part of the income taxes we as residents pay stayed in Simsbury, we would be much better off. If just a part of the sales taxes we pay were to stay in Simsbury and not go into the state coffers, we would have another source of revenue. I'm not saying the income tax should be increased, it shouldn't. I'm not saying the sales tax should be increased. I'm saying that part of those taxes that we pay to the state government should come right back to Simsbury and then use those dollars so that our real property taxes are not the burden that they are today, and that we are not compelled to try to build commercial property that is not in the character of this community. We need to bring those things together, bring full circle, because the number one problem as I see it is the burden of taxes on this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Scofield.
I think in the wake of the last few days of stock market gyrations and the concerns about the economy, that while I agree in many respects that the parochial concern of Simsbury may be property taxes, I think we have to think of the larger concern of Simsbury as part of the state and as part of the nation. And right now, I think the economy is the number one thing that people are worried about. We need to look to our government to help create an environment that enables businesses to prosper and create jobs, and bring wealth to all of the people at all of the levels of income. I think that we can't expect government to do everything. Really, businesses are the ones that create economic prosperity. But what government can do is enable them to create that prosperity. We need to make sure that there's an infrastructure, transportation, energy that enables businesses to do well in Simsbury and in Connecticut. We need to make sure there's a regulatory environment that protects consumer interests without constraining inappropriately business growth. And we really need to see a strong investment in education, because education is the key that attracts employers to our state. It's our key competitive advantage here in Connecticut. We certainly don't compete well in terms of taxes and cost of living. Where we compete the best is the workforce that we have. We've got to be looking forward to what kind of workforce we're creating in the future. When you look at studies, they show that in the not too distant future, 40% of our workforce is going to be coming from our inner cities. So we've got to invest in Simsbury's education system, but throughout the state, because if we don't have a great competitive workforce in sciences, engineering, technology, then we can't attract the kind of businesses we need to make our state prosper. So I think economy is certainly a top priority.
Thank you. And Mr. Kalechman.
Thank you. I think the most important issue facing us today is fundamentalism in the Near East. And the reason I say that is that the Near East is out of control. The Near East is responsible for the prices we're paying for gasoline. Fundamentalism helped destroy the Soviet Union, and we have it on our doorstep. And if we're not careful, what will happen is the same thing that happened. History has a tendency to repeat itself. And the same thing will happen that happened to the Roman Empire. We will spend all our resources and send all our resources and wealth to the east, as the Romans did. And this destroyed the Roman Empire. And if we're not careful, these fundamentalists from the Near East will destroy us. They're bleeding our youngsters. We're sending our youngsters over there to bleed and die. And they're starting, and if given half the chance, they'll come here and do another 9/11 on us. So we have to be vigilant. And this is the most important issue. And you have to take this into consideration. And we have to vote to protect our youngsters. And we have to vote to do away with fundamentalism through education, or however we have to do it. Even if we have to use force, it has to be done, because we have to cut the head of the snake or they'll devour us. And that's my belief.
Thank you. Ms. Noble.
Thank you. I think that the issues facing Simsbury and the concerns facing Simsbury are those that face the towns that surround us, other cities in Connecticut, all 169 of them, and all across the country. And it encompasses foreign policy, taxes, and the economy. And that is, in today's environment, how do we maintain a decent quality of life, not only for ourselves, but for our neighbors and our friends and our family? Yes, the stock market is doing roller coasters these days, and people are losing their jobs, and worst of all, people are losing their homes. And here in Simsbury, too, yes, there have been foreclosures. And it is a sad state of affairs, and people are walking around, and they're sick, and they're scared. And I understand that. I see it every day. So I think the issue here is, how do we maintain a decent quality of life and take care of ourselves and take care of each other and bring the economy and our life back to what it was? And it's not an easy task. But there are good people out there, many of them sitting up here at the table with me, who are willing to put themselves out to try and do that. We have a wonderful school system, and no one wants to lose that. And yet no one wants to pay higher property taxes. We know that there's a healthcare crisis out there, but no one wants to put more money into the healthcare industry because they're too concerned about losing their own savings. Businesses are floundering. The high cost of gas is choking everyone. So we have a large task ahead of us, but what affects government affects all of us as individuals. Again, how do we maintain our quality of life? I think that's the big question on everybody's mind.
Thank you. Okay. And now we will move on to our final question, which is a citizen's question. And Ms. Scofield, we'll begin with you. Do you see a need for more affordable multifamily rental and single-family homes in Simsbury? And if so, how would you, if elected as Simsbury State Rep, accomplish that?
Since I'm first, I'm going to ask you to repeat the question again.
Yes. Okay, it's a multi-part question. Do you see a need for more affordable multifamily rental and single-family homes? That's part one. And if So, if you do, how would you, if elected, accomplish that?
Okay. Yes, I think it's really important that we invest in affordable housing. I do talk to people when I go door to door and when they contact me at the office, and particularly seniors are often complaining to me that they have a difficulty affording their own home, especially because of the property tax burden here in Simsbury. And while we have invested, we have seen the development of some new condo kinds of places in Simsbury for seniors, they're not very affordable in most cases. There is a stock of affordable housing in different pockets of the town, but some of it's older and needs a lot of maintenance and repair work. So I think it really does make sense to make sure that people have the opportunity to stay in a community where they've lived for much or all of their lives, while still perhaps downsizing or moving to a different kind of a home. They no longer need the 4-bedroom place that they had their family in. Maybe they move to a single or 2-bedroom kind of home. As I said earlier, would love to see us have some of that kind of housing built downtown. Make it a walkable community. What a great thing for us to be able to live downtown and walk out our door, go to the Maple Tree for dinner, whatever, walk down the street and have an ice cream cone without having to get in your car, do your groceries. So one of the things that we've done at the legislature is a lot of work in looking at affordable housing solutions, and I'm blanking on the name of, it's called Home Connecticut, that's the name of it, a big piece of legislation we looked at last year to provide incentives for construction in incentive zones where there's mixed use and where it's walkable communities in order to stimulate the kind of construction of affordable housing that we're talking about.
Thank you. Mr. Kalechman.
Yes. Do you see a need for more affordable housing in multi-rental and single homes? Are you aware that the Calibro company tried to build multi-housing and single housing, and the town of Simsbury and the elected officials should know this, and Mr. Heahney, who served for 8 years, should know this. The elected officials went out and hired Robinson, and Cole, and paid him $1 million to go to court to prevent Calibro from building in Simsbury, and they tied up all that property from the developer. Even though the attorneys were aware that there had been a ruling in Ohio, brought by Ohio to our Supreme Court, that stated that the same situation that existed in Ohio was anti-constitutional and that he had to allow it. But we, the citizens of Simsbury, were taxed, and we paid Robin Cole $1 million to defend whatever they were defending, and we wanted affordable housing. And as soon as everybody accepts it, then we'll have it. And when the voters decide they want it, we'll get it. Now, one other thing in closing. This charrette thing that's more or less being parlayed and everybody's told it's great, it's not so great. What that charrette is, the town already voted they don't want it. What the charrette does is bring all the developers in to the back door.
Thank you. Okay, and finally, thirdly, I should say, Ms. Noble.
Thank you. Could you repeat the question for me,
Yes,
please?
this is a
Thank
stumper. Okay. Do you see a need for more affordable multifamily rental and single-family homes in Simsbury. That's part one, maybe if I break it down. And part two, if I think you see that need, what would you do as an elected rep to make it happen? So
Let
it's a
me say-
two-part question.
To the first part, most emphatically, yes. Yes, yes, yes. As a whole, we need more affordable housing in the state of Connecticut. For the last 10 years, I have worked closely with Partnership for Strong Communities as well as the Connecticut Housing Coalition to advocate for more affordable housing. As we know, housing costs have skyrocketed in Connecticut. I think by having affordable housing here and multifamily housing, we would definitely increase our socioeconomic diversity in the town, and I think that's very important for the students here. As for how I would go about it, there have been a lot of laws passed at the municipal level whereby if you destroy or you demolish a piece of affordable housing, an apartment building, you then have to rebuild one for one. And I don't believe that those laws have been passed here in Simsbury, and I don't think they're being rigorously enforced, which they need to be. I think that we should have more low-interest loan programs to encourage home ownership in Simsbury, encourage people to buy the multifamily homes, live in them, and maintain them through tax incentives and tax breaks. And finally, I would agree with Representative Scofield that to have a walking community downtown would be an ideal community. Having lived in one myself in Willimantic and again in New York, I miss it terribly. We would eliminate congestion and traffic. We'd get to know our neighbors again. I think it'd be lovely.
Thank you. And now, finally, Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. Every community should provide affordable housing throughout this state. Simsbury has had a good record in the past of providing affordable housing. And you may remember the Virginia Connolly housing, the Heahney Farms housing. And I'm disappointed to see that the community has not, since the Heahney Farms development, done a lot in this area. The Planning Commission went a long way trying to encourage affordable housing to be part of any subdivision that became part of this community. And I think that what we need to do is encourage that kind of participation where the cost can be spread over a number of homes. As Mr. Kalechman referred to the Culbro development, we will see a large number of affordable homes built in the north end on the Culbro property. That has been a settled case now, and we're going to see a lot of homes built there. And I think those homes have to be absorbed into our community before we go further with affordable housing. But we should, as a community, determine ways to constantly preserve the affordable housing that we have today, perhaps by tax incentives to those seniors who are in affordable homes to keep them affordable, because we've seen a lot of affordable homes be purchased and torn down and see a new home put up on that property, and that's taking away the affordable stock that we have. And we need to make sure that there are programs so that young people can afford our community. But in a community like Simsbury, where a single-family lot can cost you $200,000, it's extremely difficult to create affordable housing. It takes government action. It takes a lot of forethought and a lot of time to be successful. And I think we need to move forward in that regard to make sure that we continue to provide our fair share of affordable housing in Simsbury, just as every other town in Connecticut should.
Thank you. All right, we are going to now move on to the closing statements. I'm going to let everybody have a sip of water. We'll let everybody collect themselves for a minute, and I'll just say that we'll be going in reverse order from your right to left. I got that right? Yes. Good. Are you ready, Ms. Noble?
I believe I'm as ready as I'm ever going to be.
All right, you have 3 minutes to make your closing statements, and then I'll just have a couple words at the end, okay?
Thank you. I didn't prepare any closing statement because I didn't know what I would say after all this was over and done, because I wasn't really sure what was going to happen tonight. But I have to say that this has been a wonderful experience. It has been a learning experience for me, as I hope it has been for you. I look forward to the upcoming election, and I look forward to the upcoming debate. The questions you've given us tonight have been most interesting and have given me food for thought. I'm particularly interested in the questions that we just answered, the ones that came from the citizens of Simsbury, because it's your questions that are most important to me. You are the one that I have to answer to. I have a duty to do that as someone who's running for office and hopefully will be elected to office. It is a duty that I take very, very seriously. And yes, as I said before, my platform, if you will, is healthcare and healthcare reform and paid sick days, the outsourcing of jobs, or the stopping them, I should say, a more fair tax structure, and to just be there for you and to have you know that my door will always be open, I will always be available, and I will always be here to answer your questions as I did tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Kalechman, your 3-minute closing statement, please.
Yes. I would be remiss in my duties if I didn't share my position papers with you. I support restoration of the Rocky Hill State Veterans Hospital for veterans, and especially the young veterans who are now returning from Afghanistan and Iraq. I support eliminating unfair exemptions and state labor laws which prevent agricultural workers from forming unions. I support the need for research related to the use of medication technicians and long-term care. I support changing the absentee ballot application and issuing of the absentee ballot being filled out in nursing homes. I support the constitutional cap on growth and state spending. I strongly oppose the outsourcing of state jobs by third parties to foreign companies. I strongly oppose finder's fees or remuneration in any form paid out by the state treasurer. I support a bill that will prevent elected or private officials from receiving any type of remuneration from the state treasurer after they have left state office or state service in any way. I will oppose legislation or regulatory efforts to eliminate benefit levels for unemployment compensation. I will vote in favor of increasing Connecticut's minimum wage to a livable standard. I will support legislation protecting municipal employees' positions in the workplace and their retirement positions. I will vote to repeal the anti-labor provision in Public Act 0101 that was the Waterbury takeover. I support the closing of the Department of Children, Family Services Teenage Prison in Middletown, otherwise known as a secured facility, and redirecting the $300,000 spent per teenager to a new concept of safe houses. I support efforts to attract and retain high-quality teachers for our schools and state agencies. I strongly feel that the state and local taxes are not being shared fairly by business and industry in Connecticut. I feel that the legislation should be introduced to have the Department of Economic Community Development retrieve all loans and grants that were given out due to favoritism or fraud. I strongly favor repealing legislation regarding workmen's compensation laws that were introduced during the late Rowland administration. I strongly support legislation maintaining health insurance for all employees residing in the state of Connecticut. I support public transportation, and it's time Simsbury had mass public transportation, which they've been remiss.
Thank you. Okay. Ms. Scofield?
Given my track record of achievements in my first 2 years, I hope that Simsbury voters will recognize my commitment to this job and return me to office for another 2 years. 2 years ago, when I ran for this office, I promised that I would keep Simsbury informed and that I'd be accessible and responsive to constituents. I kept my promise, and many constituents have noticed the difference. One wrote me, for example, "I've never had an elected official respond so promptly." Another wrote saying, "Thank you so very much for your personal, quick response to my call for help. If only all legislators would be so responsive." I've worked to help many constituents solve problems ranging from difficulty getting medical services to problems arising from identity theft. Businesses in Simsbury are also my constituents, so I stay actively involved with the Chamber of Commerce, and I make a point of visiting businesses in town to make sure that they know that I'm here for them too. I've helped small businesses to access state programs that are available for them as fledgling companies. 2 years ago, I promised to work towards universally available, affordable health benefits, and I've kept my promise. I proposed a comprehensive health reform initiative, the only one that the business community endorsed. Parts of it passed, including a part that I mentioned earlier that enables young adults to be able to stay on their parents' insurance until their 26th birthday. This makes affordable insurance available to young adults who are disproportionately uninsured. But it didn't cost the state anything. I also proposed a bill to provide much better benefits to seniors on CONPACE, saving them each over $1,000 a year. Again, I found a way to do this at minimal cost to the state. The bill has bipartisan support, and I want to return next year to secure its passage. So I have found ways to improve healthcare access without breaking the state budget. 2 years ago, I promised to fight for funds for Simsbury's education system, and I kept my promise. In the last 2 years, Simsbury has received a 64% increase in education funds. 2 years ago, I promised to help preserve Simsbury's beauty and to protect Simsbury's open spaces and our environment. Again, I kept my promise. Simsbury has received over $1.2 million in state grants and bonding money for various open space initiatives. I organized a very successful litter cleanup day in Simsbury, and I proposed a comprehensive recycling bill that was supported by all of the stakeholders, from the environmentalists to the bottlers. I achieved all of these things without voting for any tax increases, even though both the governor and the majority party proposed an income tax increase. It's unusual for a freshman to get legislation passed in the first year, but I got several bills passed, from health benefits to protection of the Farmington River. I've demonstrated my energy, commitment, and capability in the last 2 years. I've sought to earn your trust and confidence, and I ask you to return me to the legislature for another 2 years to continue my work.
Thank you. And finally, Mr. Heahney.
Thank you. In 1999, it was my great honor to be elected by the people of this town to be their state representative. And for the following 8 years, I made it my central task to work for the people of this town. One of the participants in the debate tonight said, that's a parochial thought. Well, I think it's a parochial job. While we have to look out for what's the best interests of the state of Connecticut, what my job is, as your state representative, is to look out for you and take care of the people of this town and their needs and their interests, and not subvert them to some other interest or vision. In that view, I believe that the people of this town and the people of this state are overtaxed. And I've had that view for the entire time I've served this community. When I went to the legislature in 1999, the gasoline tax was 39 cents a gallon. Well, now it's 25, but we also have the excise tax on top of that. It's unfortunate. But I'm a person that went to the legislature to reduce taxes because I believe we as a people are overtaxed. And I dedicated myself to this community and to the view that we were not getting the sufficient state aid, and that as a state, as an entire state, we were way overtaxed. And certainly any comparison to any state shows that we're paying per capita taxes that are way too high. During my tenure in the legislature, I also made it a point to make sure that we received our fair share of funding for open space preservation. And I'm very proud of the many, many grants we got to preserve property throughout this town. It's a long list of grants that we received, and I worked very hard with the Simsbury Land Trust and others, and the community, the town itself, to make sure that they were positioned the best possible way to receive those grants. Also, we as a town have the obligation to provide a quality education, and we do a great job of that. With a parent of 4 children, I have been proud every day my children were in our schools. But I also saw that the state was not being fair by sending over $8,000 a year per student to Hartford. Half of which the children don't even show up, and half don't graduate. And they send a little over $1,000 here to Simsbury. It's an outrage. And I went, and for 8 years I was a member of the Education Committee. I became the ranking member of the Education Committee, and I relentlessly pressed for changes in the formula. In my last year of service, the formula had included a cap that you could only receive a 6% increase in any given year. And that cap held us back as a community from getting the fair share. Finally, I was able to get that cap removed. And it was when that cap removed was that we received the large sums of money that we received.
I think that's it.
And I thank you.
Okay. Thank you. And I hope you'll just indulge me for a moment. This is the professor in me. Just let me say that I would like to congratulate the organizers of this event for posing such thoughtful, really, I thought in some ways difficult questions for the candidates, that you really had to think them through. And I really thought they were terrific. The citizens' questions were good. This was a high-level debate. And I promised my Trinity students, I have a public policy class in the morning. I told them I was doing this, and I will report back. Also, it was interesting for me to see, despite the obvious differences, how much agreement there really was among the candidates on so many issues, and how at the local level people are able to speak to one another. And you just see how much we really have in common. And I think this is especially important during this highly contested presidential election, where if you're only watching, MSNBC and, CNN and whatever else and reading the blogs, you would think that people could not have a civil conversation. So again, I think it's just wonderful. Thank you all for turning out, because this is what makes democracy work. Thank you very much.
I would like to thank Dr. Fulco for being a superb moderator this evening, and I'd also like to thank our 4 candidates for very thoughtful and well thought out answers to the questions. And also remind everybody we have a second debate for our 4 candidates on Thursday, October 16th at 7:30 back here in the public library. So we'd like to invite everybody to come back then. And also, if you have questions you'd like to submit to be included in the debate, you could submit them by going to our website, www.simsburycitizensfirst.com. We also have organized a debate for the 2 candidates for State Senate, Art House and Kevin Witkos. It will be here in the Simsbury Public Library Monday, October 6th at 8:30 p.m. And that will be moderated by Tom Monahan, who is the political reporter for NBC 30. So again, thank you for the candidates and for Dr. Fulco for being here and for a great audience.
And thank you, Kirsten, for doing this. Really, it's
Thank you.
and thank our timer.
Our timer.